My name is Laura Michet. I'm 31 years old. I live in Los Angeles. I started off in the games industry in 2011 working for Tencent, writing quests for browser-based social games. And since then I've had a very wacky career where I have ping-ponged around game development roles, doing everything from market research to business development support to localization to eventually games media, and then back to game development where I've done writing and editing for indie games and now editing at Riot's Forge department.
Gotcha.
Which publishes indie games.
So why wacky? I guess we could start there. I mean, do you feel like is there a more traditional or conventional path to wind up where you have wound up, or is there some other place other than the destination that you feel is kind of wacky, as you call it?
Well, I entered game development because I wanted to do games writing and design, right? I started off doing quest design for like a bunch of browser games back when Facebook games were popular. And I was working for Tencent at the time, and I kept working for Tencent for the next 5 years, but they changed my job every 6 months. So I had a very eclectic resume where the only constant was that I was frequently asked to write things in English, right? So I started off as a writer, and then they used my writing ability in a bunch of different contexts. And I think for a lot of my career, I felt like I was going nowhere because I was gaining no expertise in anything, and I was just my whole job was to be able to accomplish anything that was asked of me as quickly as possible, And only in the last couple of years have I been able to really focus on and get good at specific things rather than being jack of all trades, solving random problems as they're slung at me.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, did you have... I mean, I don't know, because I think, often when I talk to people who have covered games, I think there's this feeling that the path traditionally is, where do you go from there? Either you go and, you work for a website, you work for a media outlet, or you work in PR. I mean, I guess I don't know how goal-oriented you were per se, when you started. It sounds like you said... as far as like if there was a goal, was it just to learn as much, or did you want to make games? Or I'm sorry, I flaked on what you said, but I know that you mentioned some sort of specific thing that you were oriented towards when you started.
Yeah, when I started, I wanted to do games writing, and my very first job in games was writing and designing quests for a game, right? And I was like, hell yeah, this is what I want to do. And almost immediately I was dragged off to do a lot of other different things. And then even moving to ZAM was also, to some extent, me getting thrown into another situation that I hadn't planned for, because I was transferred to work on that team unexpectedly. So I spent a very long chunk of my career, just reactively handling challenges rather than feeling like I had agency over my job. Mm-hmm. And the good thing about that is that I learned a lot. I learned a lot about how different types of games are made. I learned a lot about how business development works. I learned a lot about how market research works. I learned how to, talk to people with really different experiences and backgrounds in game development. People from other countries and from other corners of the industry and other parts of the world. And so I think I really benefited from that. But it was definitely, it definitely felt kind of, crazy and agencyless for a long time.
Yeah. I wonder how much of that is just sort of endemic to writing careers in general. Do you find, like, on teams you've been on the past, like, are you working with other people who, like, they're doing exactly what they set out to do and they also took a circuitous path? Or, like, have they sort of wound up there more directly than you feel like maybe you have?
I think other people are better than I am at applying for things and, taking control over themselves. I know that a lot of people have had circuitous paths to writing in games. A lot of folks who don't start off as writers become writers. A lot of folks who plan to write for one kind of media end up writing for games instead. Mm-hmm. but yeah, I think I might have had more job titles, I think, than most other folks I have met who write for games.
Right. Yeah, well, I mean, you mentioned wacky, so that just sort of caught my ear, and I guess I'm sort of trying to figure out like where to go from here. And one of the things I know I wanted to mention is, in our emails earlier, I really appreciated you sort of pushing back on like sort of the notion or like the idea of like thinking about video games like sort of as a monolith. And so, you mentioned like, like your brain just finds it difficult to think of games in that way. And I would agree. I mean, I think it doesn't make much sense to think in that way. And I think people often can sort of maybe blur over the fact that maybe they are engaged in that sort of thinking, but just to sort of abstract out from there, like, why do you think that, like, I mean, I don't know if you run into that sort of feeling of myopia often, but I guess I'm just curious, like, why that continues to persist, like this sort of outlook that, like, capital V video games are one thing, and sort of also believing that, like, their problems are, wholly unique to them.
Yeah, I think a lot of people sort of have preloaded in their brain a specific kind of thing they think of when they think of video games.
Yeah.
And I think that's natural, right? Like if you're interested in PC games or whatever, you're going to be more sensitive to like the different varieties of communities that you can get to through the PC, right? Like you might be more aware of traditional MMOs, and you might be more aware of experimental indie games and non-commercial stuff, right? Mm-hmm. Because you have access to a platform that people don't have to pay to be on. But if you are somebody who plays primarily like retro games or whatever, you're probably not going to think of itch, or like communities of people putting stuff up on the internet for free. And then additionally, I've also had like a professional background to some degree in biz dev. I didn't have a role of any seniority or importance, but I was, like able to go to business meetings and see the kinds of things happening in them, right? And it was a lot. It was a very see the sausage get made kind of experience, and it allowed me to realize, like, oh, I don't really know why games are made. Like the compensation people receive for making games totally controls the kind of thing they make. Do they receive investment for working on this platform or another platform? What genres are believed to be hot right now, right? What audiences are they telling people they're going after? If they're receiving compensation through Patreon, the kind of thing they're going to make is totally different from the kind of thing they'd make if they were receiving, like a $15 million budget that they need to plan out and justify to people. If they are making games for no money at all and they're rejecting commercialism entirely, the kind of thing they're going to make is completely different. The people they're going to be talking to are different. The audiences they're going to be serving and the principles they're going to live out through their work will be completely different. So because I've been so interested in experimental games myself, while simultaneously being in these giant companies where like decisions made are about huge piles of money, I've been able to, in the same day, deep dive into both ends of the scale at once. And it made it super obvious to me, that it's difficult to talk about games without talking about the money that makes them and the mindsets that creates and how different they can be and how little they can collide or interact with one another.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's an incredible amount of, like, I often think about, like, how to communicate issues or particular ripples or echoes of both, like trying to connect dots with people, quote unquote, outside of video games, just trying to sort of help explore ways that there are repetitions of patterns in history, or just ways that like are exactly the thing that you're saying, that they aren't, 100% wholly, exceptionalistically unique. But I mean, I wonder, I think maybe you ran down the list a little bit there. Like, how often do you see, people out there who are kind of like unknowingly maybe helping to spread misinformation, or you find like have wrong assumptions about the decisions, governing those sausages that you say you've seen get made. Like, like how often do people who think they're really clued in just have sort of a wrong idea,
Yeah, I think on Twitter it's become easier and easier to see folks every time there's a new game announced that has like a queer main character or something like that, and the studio is like, we're the first ones to have ever done XYZ, like we're the first game with a trans main character, and like it's so easy to turn around and see like literally hundreds of games with trans main characters on itch, so that's an example I've seen where commercial games sort of take for granted that they don't have to acknowledge or interact with the experimental scene, whereas the people in the experimental scene are hyper aware of the fact that they're not being acknowledged or not being interacted with, and I think part of that is because they're not being hired, right? So people in the experimental scene are like, damn, if these people want to do a good job, they should hire me. I've had so much experience doing this kind of thing. And people in the commercial scene are just telling themselves, I don't have to interact with that. I don't have to think about it. I don't have to take it seriously, So that's probably the easiest place to see, people who are funded and have different audiences, when all that stuff is different, how seriously or not seriously they can take one another.
Well, what about like, as you said, like being into games that are a little more experimental, like what about just that assumption of like, oh, they need to hire me. Like what is it actually like being there? It's probably hard to sum up in a single answer, or a single word, but like, sort of boots on the ground, like having a background like that, working at one of the bigger companies, like the assumption of like, oh, all they need to do is hire me. Like what are the other skills that are involved in like just sort of existing in that space, or what are the challenges of coming from that background and existing in that space? Like I'm sure there's more to it than like all they need to do is hire someone else who thinks differently. I'm sure there's ways, just like communication things, on and on.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't hired out of the experimental scene. I was just hired straight out of college, right? Like I graduated and I wasn't really making games when I was in college. I was really involved in like reading games media, and I ran like a blog back in 2009, 2010 with my friend. But I was one of your, bog standard liberal arts college grads who could take notes and complete tasks, and that's about it, right? Mm-hmm. I really do think that most people can do the kind of work that I was doing when I first started out in games. I think that most of the fancy skills you need to make it in any industry are things you learn on the job, because most of them are, information about how to collaborate with other people in an environment where there's money, right? Mm-hmm. How to collaborate with other people when you have budget limitations, when you're being, held to the standard of delivering something for somebody. You can learn some of that in college, but most folks in college don't get that kind of agency over projects and stuff like that. And, if you go into video games, you're often forced to have that kind of agency over what you're doing or what you're shipping or something like that. So, I don't know. I really do think most people can do that kind of work. Entry-level games industry stuff in, like, many fields. I'm not saying, like, every field, but, like, I was going in as a writer, and then I ended up doing producer-esque type shit, and then I ended up doing market research stuff. Like, almost everything I did was just, like, totally standard, like, white-collar office laborer work, which is anybody can do that shit.
Well, so, I mean, talking about these kind of disconnects, I mean, I often talk to, people who don't work in the industry or don't have designs to, they're quote unquote just fans. And I think sometimes, they hear about various problems in the industry and they often wonder, like, I mean, I don't know, I guess I wonder, like, other than like people going to work at such companies and sort of learning for themselves what it's really like, or, when they hear about certain problems in the industry, like I think people often wonder, like, well, what can I do, quote unquote, just as a fan? I mean, are there things you think people who care about games, who care about the people who make them, like, what more can they do as like as a civilian, do you think?
I don't know. I think that if you're a fan of a game studio and you want to help that, I don't know. Like if a company is running itself poorly, there's probably not much you can do to help the company, but there's a lot you can do to help individuals, right? And that includes treating them respectfully, supporting them in the ways that they ask for, right? One of the things you'll probably most often see the people who shepherd games communities ask for is for people to treat each other well, so that helps a lot too. I think spending money on stuff that's like within your budget that is interesting or risky is a great thing to do, but I also don't think anybody should feel compelled to spend money they don't want to spend, particularly in these times.
Yeah.
So I think it's good to support experimental or risky things that are within your means to support and that you feel passionately about. But that's, all that I think that the number of people who are out there buying shit because they feel like they should support it is probably pretty small, and the number of people out there buying things that they're genuinely interested in is bigger, and that's fine.
Yeah.
Because frankly, as a game maker, I don't want people playing my stuff because they feel like they have to. I want people playing my stuff because they're interested in it and they're going to engage with it and talk to me about it or whatever. Mm-hmm. Telling people you like their stuff, I don't know. That's always great.
Yes.
There's a lot of negativity out there, so I don't know. It's sometimes good to hear whether or not you've had an impact on anybody. That can be really rewarding.
Right. Yeah, on anybody at all. I mean, I don't know. I mean, you had said, in our emails that you want more people to understand how games work as a business, but at the same time, I guess you said you also felt that, most people don't want to learn these kinds of things.
Yeah.
I mean, like,
I think in general...
Yeah.
In general, people should learn more just about how businesses work in general. And it's hard because the goal of most businesses is to not let people know everything about them, right?
Right.
So I think it would be very illustrative for every American to sit in on some meeting and see how people who actually have $1 million talk about it, people who are in charge of large budget things talk about their employees or talk about what they're trying to do. I think a lot of people, when they look at games, they think this game was made because somebody really loved it, and that's true. The people who actually made the game ideally felt that way about it. But there's another layer of who funded the game, why did they fund it, how eager were they to fund it, how did they think of you? It's just good to be aware of how much money is flying around society, and how I don't know, society is fucked up, right? So I feel like if more people knew about how American businesses work, they would be better equipped to live in the world that we live in.
Well, so
and deal with how fucked it is.
What's the nature of because I've often wondered that, and I've pointed that out through the years that we are familiar with certain series that are associated with certain studios and companies, but we know virtually nothing about why these series exist, and what sort of drove, what was the catalyst or the impetus for them in the first place. I mean, I don't know if you're privy to such things. I mean, you're talking about such meetings. I mean, what is maybe, is there a surprising thing to the nature of the way these kinds of things are talked about in these meetings? Or, is there a more human shading to it? Or, what's sort of the character, from what you're aware of, why these companies birth these things and why they, continue to maintain them?
Yeah, I guess it's more you can form a really personal connection with anybody whose work that you like, right? You can imagine in your head that you're friends with this person and that they care about you. And in a lot of situations, that might even be true, you know. But those people are only given the opportunity to work on that thing that you like and to care about it with you because they've been lucky enough to get hired on a product that was lucky enough to get funding. And it was lucky enough to get funding because it was lucky enough to have leaders who could articulate something essential to the person holding the money bag on the right day, you know, when they were lucky enough to be heard, you know, and they were lucky enough to not get laid off the last time there were layoffs, and they were lucky enough to get the job at all and not be, you know, discriminated against or overlooked for that opportunity. They were lucky enough to have good work to do. That's one of the big things that have that's really impressed itself on me. I feel very lucky to have good work to do at Riot. It's so easy to end up in a situation where you love your coworkers, but you don't feel like the things that you're doing are meaningful or that they have any impact on anyone, right? And there are plenty of those jobs in games, you know. People who, and I think part of the reason why this is so hard in game development is because a lot of fans are children, right? Like they don't understand how shitty it is to work, right? And how shitty it is to need to be paid, you know? And I think these were all lessons that I learned pretty harshly in the first couple of years of my career. And it totally changed the way I think about games and about game developers. You know, like if I play a game that's broken as hell, like the first thing I think of now is like, who pushed these people to release this game on this timeline? You know, because game developers never release something that they know is broken as hell. They don't want to do that, right? So then you got to think, well, the reason it came out is probably for a money-related reason. And what kind of money-related reason was it? I can imagine a bunch. And I don't know. I wish that that more people were aware of like the material conditions of game development and like how expensive it is to employ all those people who make your favorite game, and how risky it is to pay people that much money to make an entertainment product, you know, and stuff like that. Because it would change the way I think they think about the humanity of these people who make these games for them. They're not people holding or withholding or controlling their fun. They're people who are trying to make it inside like the mindless. I don't know, to use a metaphor that was used in a game. You know, the paperclip making game. What was that? Paperclip Simulator, the idle game where you're a robot that makes paper clips.
Oh, yeah. yeah. I remember. I don't remember the name, but I know what you're talking about, yeah.
Yeah, well, that's capitalism, right?
Yeah.
Video games are like a mindless paperclip making amoeba that's trying to make money from you sometimes, right? But under other financial conditions, maybe they're not. And if people could like identify when that's happening to them, or what games are made that way, or what people they know in game development have to live under those conditions. You know, it might change the way that they think about the humanity of the people who make games and about the products that they like and about who they are to these people, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I have a ton of thoughts about that because that's something, I mean, I guess I wonder, well, I mean, I think it's just a thing, unfortunately, for whatever reason, although we know many of them, people can't seem to understand some basic truths about this space and those types of companies unless they go and work there. But if you think about it, like in such a basic human way, it's like, well, of course these are, you know, groups of individuals, and all groups of individuals have flaws, and obviously, you know, a video game is an entertainment product, and there's a lot of things that, like, you know, these are a nice to have thing. But yeah, I mean, people are treated like such shit from external forces. We hear a lot about people being treated shit from internal forces. And I mean, you mentioned the word luck a bunch. And I feel like in all these conversations I've had for this and all my years of following, you know, games and being a fan myself and being there's that word again, luck, being lucky enough, myself to like go and attend conferences and cover them. Like I feel like I've heard many people talk about their work in games, things like postmortems, other things. I don't know that I've ever heard the word luck until you just mentioned it, and you mentioned it many times. Like, is it taken for granted?
Yeah, well,
is it taken for granted, or like are people afraid if they say it's luck that it may run out if they name it?
Well, like, I don't know, half or more of the times I named their luck is probably also the same as privilege, right? Like,
sure.
It increases your luck,
right, Right.
So, I think, I don't know, when I was a kid, my dad always told me that I could be as good as I wanted at something, but I could never control whether somebody who was better than me would show up, right? And I really took that to heart when I was a kid because I was an overachiever who rarely won things,
Yeah.
I very frequently would find myself stymied in some way that would be frustrating, in grade school, middle school. And my dad would remind me that like everything is a crapshoot and you have zero control over a lot of the most hype emotional moments in your life, and I really agreed with that, right? Because I could see it happening to me and to my friends. And then as I got older, when you start applying for jobs and stuff, you sort of have to tell a story about who you are to the person hiring you, right? And you're trying to make it an appealing story. And the more I told that story about myself to potential employers or to people hiring for internships and stuff like that, the more I realized that like all the events in my life were just totally random, right? Like
yeah.
I didn't get any job I got because there was like a national ranking of everybody who wanted that job and I was the best, right? Like I got that job because I met somebody randomly or because I happened to say something emotionally open and vulnerable to a professor at the right moment,
Right.
Or because my application got read by the right kind of person.
Wow.
Or
even more,
like
even more myriad than that. Like the person who read it, they ate the right breakfast that day and they were in the right mood.
Yeah. So like, privilege also plays a huge role in all of this. I was lucky to go to a good college and to not, be sick or lack resources or something that would prevent me from at least applying to these jobs, right? But I was definitely aware that I was not getting them because I was the best at anything or because I was even better than average, right? And so I've strongly felt that probably most of the stuff that I do could probably be done by a lot of people, and that a lot of games a lot of jobs, not necessarily in entry-level games jobs, but also like entry-level jobs in almost any industry, like most people can do them,
Yeah.
It's just, are you privileged enough or are you lucky enough to be put in a spot to get them? So I think a lot of people don't talk about that because the idea that someone would want your advice is flattering.
Yeah.
And you want to help that person, and you don't want to say, well, you just got to get lucky like me, sucker. I have no control over my existence. I'm just floating out here like a dandelion puff in the wind, and shit's happening to me.
Right.
But I really do sort of believe that's how a lot of people's lives go. Like we're just at the mercy of our environment, and all you can do is try to do a good job if you get lucky enough to have the opportunity to do good work.
Right.
Or privileged enough.
Yeah. And I think just in the way people's careers typically go, there's a tendency to self-mythologize, or, you look back and you think, oh, obviously A flowed to B and then to C. But that's not how anyone experiences life, and that's usually not the way careers go. And so I wonder, people who you've worked with in the field who maybe don't realize they're lucky or to what degree they might be lucky. I guess I'm just curious. Like, do you notice, like, are there things that about understanding this space, people who don't realize they might be lucky, like things that they struggle with in understanding others also in the space? I mean, whether it be coworkers, whether it be fans, whether it be I don't know, just like how does sort of not having that in your worldview affect the way that like you interact with others, or ways that you can't interact with others?
I think it can make people arrogant to think that they fully control all of their good fortune, or they fully control everything good that has happened to them. There's a tendency to believe that you deserved it, and I think part of the unspoken, flip side of believing that you got where you are because you're lucky or privileged is the acknowledgement that you don't necessarily deserve it. Like that deserving things isn't really even on the table. It's not an element in the math going on here. Everything is just fucking random or sad, So I think people who believe that they got where they got because of their own hard work solely, and don't recognize the good support they've had or the luck that they've had are much more likely to be a dick, which I'm sure comes back to bite them in all sorts of ways, but only if I'm lucky enough for that to happen to them.
Yeah, I guess there's luck involved there too, in a strange way, although I guess there's luck involved with everything. Well, I mean, so you said, in our emails that, so games as an industry, as a series of industries, as an ecosystem, whatever, like, it has the same problems as other industries and, other entertainment mediums. Does some of what you're talking about here connect with what you were saying there about, like, often games can be worse because of the lack of support for individuals? Does this hook in with that, or was there something else you were thinking of there?
Yeah, though I think when I wrote that, I might have been thinking more about how games are analogous to other entertainment industries and the kinds of risk they pose. I don't know. Entertainment is a crapshoot. Yes. You can never be 100% certain. It's not like building a bridge. You can do math and see if the bridge is likely to fall down or not. But with entertainment, there are whole professions where they tell themselves they can do that math and figure it out, but really I don't believe that they can. There's a lot of after the fact justification of entertainment product success, looking at stuff like Harry Potter and saying, oh, of course Harry Potter would be successful. Well, no, like that's just not true. Anything could have been successful. We've never been through a period of time where there were no successful pieces of media because nothing was mathematically satisfying the success quotient, right? Like it's just sort of random,
Right.
Whereas with, I don't know. So there's that makes games and TV and film similar. They're sort of like bad investments because you don't really know if they're going to be successful or not, and they lead to unstable careers because you don't know if they're going to be successful or not. And then another thing about entertainment in general is that every challenge needs sort of like a new crew of people to solve it, Like I love working with comedy. I don't love working with romance, Mm-hmm. So if I were working for a games company and they were making a comedy game one week, I would say, fuck yeah, I deserve to be here. I belong here. But then maybe the next week they pivot to romance and suddenly I'm like, fuck, I don't want to be here at all, And in film and TV, they satisfy this with broad-reaching professional guilds that support people to basically live as permanent freelancers, right?
Yeah.
So you don't have to make a film crew that makes 10 movies together from the time they're 20 to the time they're 80 or whatever, right? Instead, they move from project to project as fits their skills and the things they're appropriate for. Games is like that, but very slowed down. So we still have that instability and that feeling of needing to find creative workers who are suited to the topic at hand. But we don't have that sort of flighty, the stability you get from always being moving, that film and TV folks have been able to find and have been able to access through their professional guilds. So yeah, there's a lot of similarities between different types of entertainment industries that affect the experience of working in them in analogous ways. Well, not necessarily identically, but analogously.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to ask you to prognosticate or to get out your crystal ball. I mean, topic of unionizing has come up increasingly in recent years again. Sorry, what?
I cannot see into the crystal ball on that stuff for sure.
I'm not going to ask you to. I guess what I would rather ask about is I think there are many known issues and problems. I'm sure it's not all of the issues and problems. I guess what I'm curious is maybe this is stuff that fits into lesser known problems, but what do you feel is maybe the next step forward for making, a better life, or making conditions better for workers? Apart from the
co-ops, definitely.
Sorry?
Yeah.
Oh, I was
just going to say co-ops, right?
Co-ops,
go for it.
Sure.
Yeah. I'm sorry I interrupted you. What were you going to say?
It's fine. No, it's fine. I mean, the rest of the question is basically that question. I mean, I was just going to say, apart from, the rare top-down initiative, what would help increase quality of life, sooner in the here and now?
I think people, I think this would be easier if we had universal health care, but I think that people have always had the ability to create the environment that they want for themselves, right? Workers and individuals and everybody knows what makes them happy, right?
Yeah.
And if you've been to a bunch of jobs where you're I don't like doing things this way, I'd rather do it that way. I would love a world where it'd be easier for everybody to get up and say, all right, we're doing it that way, let's do it that way together.
Yeah.
And I think co-ops are a way of doing this. They are, however, risky and hard when, health insurance is the way it is. I have type 1 diabetes, so this is constantly on my mind. Yeah. My healthcare is very expensive, and it's one of the big reasons why I've always worked for large corporations, because I get good healthcare, right? However, if I didn't have to worry about that, maybe I'd be telling myself, I should go start a co-op with my buds and, create the environment that I want to work and collaborate in, because I'm capable of doing it. I know how I work. I know how stuff happens. So I don't think there's anything more complicated to it than just giving people total agency over their own conditions, right? But it's hard in the country that we live in.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, that's a whole mess in and of itself, along with many other things right now. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if you have. I mean, I know that you spent some time, working as a editor-in-chief, but I don't know if you have opinions or even capital O opinions about games media or outlets or I don't know. I guess I don't know. Do you have much of a relationship now with quote unquote the sites that are out there now?
I definitely went through a period where I isolated that part of my brain and dropped it in the ocean.
Why?
I definitely, because, I don't know, I'll be perfectly honest, working at ZAM fucking made me unhealthy and sad, because it was a hard work, and we were, really understaffed and, didn't have enough money to do what I wanted to do, right?
Yeah.
And I loved working with the people there, but I was miserable all the time and very frustrated. And so when I was no longer there anymore, I decided to simply not think about it. And even now, I don't go to many different websites and browse them. I occasionally browse Fanbyte, the successor to ZAM, because I love those folks. But I don't. I mostly read things if they are retweeted frequently in a place where I can see them by people I trust. So I feel like I'm relatively up to date on all the latest discourse or whatever. But
yeah,
I start. So here's a funny thing. At a couple GDCs or E3s ago, I don't remember when I first started it, or right around when I was first starting at Riot. So this was probably in 2018. somebody congratulated me on making the jump from games media to games development, and I had to correct them that I had started out in games development and that I had like 5 or 6 different jobs in games development. And from my point of view, I was returning to games development to go hide.
Yeah.
And so, I'm not a fantastic website editor in chief, and my tiny traumatized editor in chief brain is hiding in a hidey hole, waiting to surprise me in dreams, and that's about it.
I don't know. I mean, I feel like I often hear the phrase. I mean, it's a little different, but like recovering critic, or I don't know. There is something where like there's definitely a lot of churn and burn there in writing overall, but like it's been a couple of years I think since I've really tracked it, but I think it was like maybe average length people are sort of able to stay if they really want to make a go of it and do it full time, or even if they want to do it freelance and hope that they can find a job, it seems like that sort of revolving door or for crop of people is like it takes about 2 years to wind up where you were talking about of just wanting to drop that part of your brain into the ocean and just never think about it again. And again, I think that's just like a standard fact of like if you're trying to do stuff as a writer. I don't really think there's a question in there, although obviously there's like stuff there with like institutional memory that just sort of gets lost. I'm sure there's all sorts of other things that get lost at the fact that it the work or staying in it just spits people up, chews them up and spits people out.
Yeah, I feel like the length of memory in both games and games writing, right, like in everything games related, is like maximum 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
And every 3 or 4 years, you go on to a new crop of people who believe they got there at the start.
Yes. I just talked to somebody yesterday who used to have a column for New York Times in the 90s about video games, and she was saying there's this weird thing now with the internet and for writers, and especially for writers who cover games, is we know more about or often people who cover games, it seems like they're more aware of things that happened 100 years ago than things that happened 10 years ago. I don't know. Some of it's like internet and siloing stuff. I guess, whatever. I could go off on a tangent there. I guess.
It's also like platforms disappearing.
Yes.
Right? Like,
yes. How
many young people know that EA Spouse happened? Most of those people weren't even like alive for LiveJournal. So of course they don't know about a bombshell LiveJournal site from the year 2004, right?
Yeah. So what gets
even though that was like sorry, yeah?
No, you go ahead, please. I'm here to listen to you.
Well, that was like a huge fucking thing, right? That was like a $14 million settlement for unpaid overtime. And it's probably still talked about every day, by the people who have to make sure that they pay people for overtime. But for the audiences that we live in and that we help create and deal with, they're not aware of it.
Yeah, that was the question that I was sort of poking at in my head, is like, first by asking like, well, do you follow any of the sites anymore? Do you read them? Like, I guess like that's sort of the side of the aisle that I come from. I've worked in entertainment journalism for about 15 years, so that's kind of the hammer I always want to reach for, and everything looks like a nail. Like,
yeah.
You talk about EA Spouse, and like I wonder with like the types of problems that there are in games. EA Spouse is a thing that happened outside of these types of sites, and I often wonder like, what is it reasonable to expect games media to cover the? I think obviously in recent years, like they have gotten better at covering issues and problems, but it's sort of it seems like they're. To me, and this is my opinion, it feels like they're sort of in a more reactive rather than proactive mindset, because these aren't new problems, and in fact, that's true. EA Spouse is like an example from like 15 years ago where stuff that moved the needle happened outside the confines of like, a writer doing some reporting. It was someone who was pissed off and, took to the internet.
Yeah, I don't know. I think if the problem of how to tell the history of video games was easy, we would all know the history of video games, I've read a lot of good print books about the history of video games, but print is like inaccessible now, The audiences we talk to live online. They read criticism online. They download and comment on and yell about games online. And all of the best history writing I've seen about games needs to be compensated, right? Because it's difficult work. And so because it's compensated, it takes different forms than, like the low margin stuff that folks read online. So if it's a book, it gets published by a real, publishing house, it ends up as a textbook or something like that. It's made of paper, so it's harder to get to. I don't know how to solve that problem myself.
Oh, that's okay. I'm not asking you to solve any problems. So, but to shift gears, to talk about like, in your working on games, like what feeling do you get out of making games or expressing yourself in that way?
I love nothing more in the world than making something and showing it to people. And that's kind of why I was so excited to go to Riot, because now I get to make and show things to a huge number of people all at once. So it's like the ultimate drug for me, I guess. I just get a huge thrill out of seeing people react to stuff that I made, and to know that I made them laugh, or entertained them for a little bit of time. Mm-hmm. I don't know. But before I made games when I was pretty young, I was like one of those obnoxious kids that always has a bunch of like really long Shaggy Dog type stories they want to tell you. And I've always just really liked taking up people's time in a way that made them happy, I guess. I don't know.
Well, I don't know if you think of it this way, but like how did you come to like your design ideals or your approach to games?
Yeah, I don't know. I have I guess I have different design ideals depending on the type of game I'm making or the tool I'm using or the genre I'm in. Back when I was making a lot of Twine games in 2012, 2013, 2014, I was really into minimalism, Mm-hmm. But in other narrative projects I've worked on have been a lot more maximalist, like Where the Water Tastes Like Wine, or some other projects I've worked on. I've also really liked, making things that are really busy or complicated or dense, So, yeah, I don't know. I think that frequently the aesthetic principles that I go for are strongly controlled by just like things I've enjoyed in that genre, or things I want to replicate, or a vibe I think I can hit.
Well, is there, I don't know, like what's something that you've maybe noticed is starting to get popular on the horizon, maybe, anywhere out in games that like, maybe it's something either you're like excited and super confused by, or maybe it's something like you're trying to understand, like, well, why is this starting to be so popular right now? Doesn't have to be like a skeptical thing, but just something that's like caught your interest and maybe people don't realize like this is, a thing that's coming.
I don't know. I have a good story about something that's already arrived, that people still don't fully understand.
Sure.
For a long time, I totally didn't understand stuff like Rust, where people fight each other all the time, and it's really like tense and nihilistic, and there's a lot of just like backstabby shit. And I feel like that whole attitude, you can see like a direct through line of different games exploring that space, from, stuff like Rust up to like PUBG, and now stuff like Sea of Thieves, right, which I've recently begun actively playing quite a lot of. And for a long time, I couldn't understand why anybody would want to play a game where other people can just like surprise kill you while you're trying to do your own thing,
right.
or games which sort of glory in this kind of everybody at each other's throats, free-for-all kind of attitude. And I don't know, with Sea of Thieves, I feel like I finally understood it, because it's a little chiller. It's very easy to escape conflict in Sea of Thieves if you just don't want to do it. And it's definitely like I think people like it. And hello?
Hey, sorry, please continue.
Yeah, I think people like it for some of the same reasons I like roguelikes, like the feeling of conquering something that has increasing stakes and difficulty the longer and longer you go, Mm-hmm. And when I first heard about this genre, I was more focused on the idea that these people are all fighting each other and being miserable to one another. But I think now I get that maybe the draw is less that and more the thrill of seeing how long you can go, which is the exact same thrill that I get out of roguelikes, So I feel like I understand this whole genre now, and I'm excited to see where else it goes. If we continue to get games like Sea of Thieves, which are a little bit lighter on the everybody murder each other all the time aspect.
Yeah, I'm a bit behind on that. I got, there was a woman I interviewed maybe 2 years ago for a book I spent all last year working on, and she invited me to play Rust with her group of friends, and I had the same reaction as you, and I still want to check it out, but it does feel hard to want to get myself all fired up to jump into that, so it's interesting to hear.
Yeah, I think part of it is, I don't know, I see so many similarities to roguelikes, which are one of my favorite genres. I've played a shit ton of NetHack and Caves of Cud in my life, and I just love them to death. I think that people frequently use games to just test themselves, and to put themselves through something, even if that thing doesn't really matter,
Yeah.
And for me, that's seeing how long I can go in Caves of Cud before dying this time, and for other people, that's how long can I last in an environment where everybody wants to PvP me,
Well, is there a developer or maybe a group of developers who you feel is quote unquote really getting it right now, who maybe is a bit of an inspiration or a North Star, or someone who you feel you're learning a lot from? Yeah.
I adore Caves of Cud by Freehold Games. That's Jason Grimblatt and Brian Bucklew, and I play it all the time, and it's phenomenal, and those folks are great. And I wish I could have ever make something quite so entertaining. It's just such a rich fantasy setting. It's a sci-fi fantasy setting, and the way it's expressed through so many different, not only sort of cosmetic, surface level details, but also the narrative is fascinating to watch get proc-gened in front of you, and there's mechanics that help build the world as well, and it's just all the different possible elements they could be using in this game coming together in such a great way. I've been playing that game pretty continuously for the last several years, and I don't think I'm ever going to stop.
Cool. All right, Laura. Well, I have just one last question for you, unless I know we jumped around quite a bit. Unless there was something else that you wanted to bring up or get into that we didn't get a chance to get into.
I think so.
All right. Well, so it's a big one and a weird one. What do you think video games have accomplished?
I think video games have made humans think more about how they affect each other's behavior than anything else, right? I think in the 20th century there was sort of a horrified fascination with the idea that TV could affect your behavior. But I think that video games have turned that into a science. How do you create systems that affect a person's actions? How do you create systems which make a person act in a way that affects their emotions? And I think we have yet to, like, fully understand as a society that we're all capable of doing this to each other and that companies are doing this to us every day outside video games, but I think that games might be the way that the average person gets close to understanding that. If like a teen can understand why a change to a battle pass in a video game affects their like emotional stability, maybe they can understand how changes to Facebook might affect the emotional stability of everyone they know, if that makes any sense.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
So I don't know. Video games have accomplished the accessibility of that understanding, maybe.